Good morning and welcome to the latest edition of Daytime Dialogues. It's my pleasure to be able to welcome a good friend, a colleague, and a very important voice in our Jewish community, Rabbi Mark Dratch. Rabbi Dratch served as a congregational rabbi for 22 years. He was the founder of JSAFE, the Jewish Institute Supporting an Abuse-Free Environment. But now he has been the executive vice president of the Rabbinical Council of America for over 10 years. And it was my pleasure while I was president of the RCA to work closely with Mark and to get to learn how many things he does for the Jewish community. And so Mark, thank you so very much for joining us today.
Thank you for the invitation. It's a pleasure to be here with you. So
let's start from some very simple things, Rabbi Dratch. What is the RCA?
What is the RCA? So you were president for 2 years, and if you can't answer that question—
I'm still trying to figure it out. That's it.
The RCA is a membership organization of Orthodox rabbis, a large spectrum of Orthodox rabbis that mostly take up the modern centrist position in the Orthodox community. And we provide support services for them. And we also represent the voice of the Orthodox rabbinate to the larger Jewish world and the interfaith world and beyond.
Well, actually, you just came back from the Conference of Presidents in Israel, where you were representing the RCA as well.
That's correct.
It's
the Conference of Presidents is comprised of some 50-odd leading organizations that serve the North American Jewish community. And we're very fortunate and very proud to have an important voice representing the Orthodox rabbinate there.
Now, you've done this for many years as in your role as the executive vice president. This conference was different, both in terms of leadership of the Conference of Presidents, but more because I assume what's going on in Israel today, where there's a lot more tension. Did you feel it at the conference?
That's true, and yes, we did. Because this is the representation of the leadership of American Jewry, leadership in Israel that want to speak to American leadership comes. So we were fortunate to hear from the Prime Minister and the President and leading members of the Knesset and journalists and people who are part of civil society and people who are doing very important things in the economic sphere there as well. And yes, the reforms, the judicial reforms took up a lot of our time and attention, as did concerns about security. We were there. I was there just before the latest terrorist attacks took place. So we really, it was a time of quiet during the time that we were there, and we didn't focus on the very terrible and tragic events that have taken place the past few days.
In terms of the reforms, did it create controversy among the representatives of the Conference of Presidents who were there, or did you just hear both sides from the politicians?
Well, we heard both sides from the politicians. We were in the Knesset one day, and in one of the committee rooms had representation from various parties discussing the judicial reforms, but in classic Knesset practice, there was not really discussion, but a lot of screaming and yelling and finger pointing. I think there's a general consensus amongst the leadership from the left to the right, represented in the President's Conference, that there were concerns about the social cohesion that is being torn apart as a result of these things, and where this is headed.
Now, wearing the hat of the executive vice president, you are really representing a very large segment of the Orthodox rabbinate. And one of the issues that is brought up to me, I just had it, a student just asked it to me a few weeks ago, is there a future for the centrist or modern Orthodox rabbinate in America? Are we sliding so far to the right and so far to the left that the middle is dissipated?
That's something that keeps me up at night sometimes, but one of my means, my principles of faith, is that there is not only space for modern Orthodoxy in the future, but it is a necessary space for the future. Those of us who are passionately committed to Torah, to the observance of mitzvot, to Eretz Yisrael, to the land of Israel and the state of Israel, those of us who at the same time want to be engaged in the larger world with it as a lichatchila, as an ideal, with all of its ideas and its opportunities, take up that center space. Now, it may be that center space will evolve and look a little bit different, just as those to our right and those to our left look different as well. The modern Orthodox rabbinate today is qualitatively different than the modern Orthodox rabbinate of a generation or 2 generations ago. And I think our children and grandchildren will see a modern Orthodox rabbinate that may have evolved in ways that we can't even predict today, because we're living in a different world and we're engaging with different ideas. But I think there will always be a very strong center for those who passionately want to be part of that center.
But it's complicated, that center. And it's one that people sometimes seem to avoid because being in the middle, it has people shooting arrows at you from both directions as opposed to just one. Is it
That's true.
Is it something that you can convince future young Talmidei Chachamim to be able to enter into the rabbinate and to serve in this kind of bridging role, or is it something that happens and you're grateful when it happens? Can we be?
I don't think it's a question. I don't think it's a question of arm twisting. If you look at many of the new members coming into the RCA in the past few years, these are young men who are passionate, who are committed, who many are lamdanim, Talmidei Chachamim. They're good scholars, and they have chosen to be part of our community because they believe in our community as well.
Now, one of the great voices for the modern Orthodox community who didn't like the phrase modern Orthodox community was your late father-in-law, Rabbi Norman Lamb, blessed memory. He was the president of Yeshiva University for so many years, the Rosh Yeshiva of Yeshiva University, and that great voice. You grew up in his house in many ways. When you were interacting with him, what were the things that really you saw that other people may not have seen being around him so much?
So just get back to the part of your introduction of him in terms of didn't like the term modern Orthodox. He was the one who coined the term centrist, and he wrote a lot about that term. And the idea being that based on the Rambam's description in Hilchot Deot about person's character traits, Yehei Adam Shamet Deotav Tamid, the middle path, the centrist path that Maimonides thought was such a wonderful thing, that a person always had to weigh and reweigh his character traits and his ideas. He felt that being a modern Orthodox or a centrist Orthodox Jew, a person who took the middle road, was somebody who was always in a state of constant tension, thinking and rethinking from the right and the left, and figuring out how he wanted or how she wanted to move forward. And so centrism for him was not a compromise, but rather a dynamic way of engaging the world and one's religious ideas and one's religious practices. Towards the end of his life, he kind of regretted having changed the title, and he went back to modern Orthodox because he felt that it had been stolen away, and tried to carve out a modern orthodoxy of the right, which was something that he identified with in parts and disagreed with in other parts. And at the end of the day, he felt labels were just labels, and what was more important is what a person thought and did and said, rather than the label with which they identified.
Now, he was the one who I think referred to modern Orthodoxy or centrist as a lechatchila in his writings. It wasn't something later. It was that he felt this was the way to be.
Yeah, that he always felt, and he lived that way. He was an unusual. It was probably one of the most important zchuyot, one of the most important treasures and gifts that I have and that I had in my life, to be able to be close with him and part of his family. He was a person who, as you mentioned, was president of the university, was Rosh Yeshiva, was engaged on the world stage in many ways, but for whom family and people were very important, and for whom Talmud Torah, the study of Torah, was extremely important, and a person who did not waste a second. When the family was sitting Shiva, we heard stories from hundreds and hundreds of people of the pastoral part of Rabbi Lamb, the favors that he did for them, the counsel that he gave to them. And I do not know how he found the time in the day to do that.
Well, I was told, and it may have actually been among the eulogies that were given, that he didn't sleep very much.
No, he didn't sleep very much. Shabbos afternoon, he would take power naps. He would tell his wife, wake me up in 12 minutes. And she would say, of course. And then, it was a little bit after that. But he took power naps. That was advice. He was rabbi at the Jewish Center for some 25 years. He worked with Rabbi Leo Young, Zichrono Livracha. He said the first piece of advice that Rabbi Young gave to him was always take a long walk. Rabbi Young used to take a walk around the reservoir in Central Park in Manhattan every day and take naps. He didn't take, Rabbi Lamb didn't take the long walks, didn't have time for them, but the naps he did. And the other wonderful piece of advice he said that Rabbi Young had given to him is never expect gratitude. What you do as a rabbi is help people because that is your job and that is your calling. Never expect gratitude. And unfortunately, too many of our rabbis have learned that that's a very, very good piece of advice.
And as executive vice president of the RCA, part of your job is to give them the gratitude that they may not get elsewhere.
This is true. Look, we do what we do not because we want to, we're expecting to thank you from people, but sometimes the rabbinate can be a difficult field. And the more we help somebody, the more we're attacked by them at various points in our career. But I've found in my rabbinate, I think we find in most of our rabbis are finding that people are really very gracious, and that our members of our congregations become friends and members of our family, and do appreciate the hard work that the rabbis put in and the things that they do for them.
Is, in your role with having founded JSafe, which is also supporting unfortunately the terrible situations of abuse and supporting those people who were victims.
Yes.
When you founded it, it was really out there. People weren't admitting to these kinds of things that were taking place. But what caused you to go that route?
So that's a long story. I don't think we have quite enough time to go into that, but I had become aware that this goes back, oh my gosh, probably 30 some odd years ago of, or even more, of some cases of child abuse in the Orthodox community. And the physician the pediatrician who was aware of these cases of child abuse was being instructed by somebody who was considered a gadol in the larger Orthodox community not to make a report to the authorities with regard to this, but to have one case was I think a second or third grader who was the last one off the school bus. It was an Orthodox bus driver. This pediatrician was told just to have the bus driver reassigned on a different route. Well, upon investigation, it was found that this bus driver was reassigned from one yeshiva to the other. And it was just something which just made no sense to me. And so at that time in the RCA, there was a group called the RCA Roundtable. Once a month, this small group would produce a position paper on something of importance. I wrote a paper on issues of child abuse, Visira of reporting to the authorities, issues of Lashon Hara that were being used to keep people from making reports, and other halachic issues that I felt became really impediments to protecting the safety and welfare of innocent Jewish children. So I published this paper. We distributed to the RCA membership and to Jewish family and child services throughout North America. And that made me an expert, because an expert is somebody who knows one or two more things than somebody else. People started calling from all over the country. And I got more and more involved in other organizations and in studying the issue. And one thing led to the other until I was privileged to found this organization some 17, 18 years ago, when people still didn't want to talk about it. Baruch Hashem, we're in a position now where the denial is less. Abuse is something which is on the agenda of the Jewish community from right to left. And we're in a much better place than we were when I started, but we still have quite a way to go.
Do you think that the percentages of abused children is as high in the Jewish community as what we hear in the general American community?
Yes, I think abuse does not discriminate. It may look a little bit different because of the culture of the community, but it certainly exists. And I think we're seeing more and more numbers now because people are feeling that it's safer to come out and make accusations and get the kind of help that they need.
So how do you ensure people from being targeted with accusations when the accusations may not be accurate, and at the same time protect the victim entirely?
Right. So, I mean, we find that studies have shown that the percentage of complaints and accusations against individuals that are false are generally low. Where we see them most are in cases of very difficult divorces, and then you may see that. But when accusations are made against clergy or against teachers or youth leaders, the number of false accusations is very, very low. And the best way to prevent that is to put safeguards in place beforehand, so that if the rabbi or the youth director or the teacher follows certain protocol and behaves in certain ways, so that false accusations could probably not be made against them, then that's the appropriate way of protecting themselves and protecting possible victims as well.
But, in certain circumstances, we immediately want to protect the victim. There was a case in Chicago where it was very, very difficult not too long ago, where victims came out 20, 25 years later. And immediately people were, again, going into this thing, what's the point of bringing it up nowadays? It's the person has passed away, leave it alone. But fortunately, key rabbinic leadership said, no, victims come first and their healing comes first. Is that always the case?
Well, it's always the case that people who are innocent deserve protection. The benefit of discussing cases that may have happened in the past where the perpetrator or the alleged perpetrator has already passed away is that, number one, it can bring healing to his or her victims. And secondly, it encourages others who are victims to come forward and to seek protection, because it shows them that people will listen to them. It's important to know that when allegations are made, in the first and foremost, they're allegations. So we believe victims and we support them, but there is a process of investigation. And if it's investigated, it's found that the alleged perpetrator is not guilty, then the community needs to do as much to restore that person's reputation as they did perhaps in maligning it when the accusations were coming forward.
To switch to a little bit of a happier topic, if it's okay.
Sure.
And to go back to your father-in-law, Zal. Now, your father-in-law was the Rosh HaYeshiva of Yeshiva University at the same time as Rav Soloveitchik was the Rosh Yeshiva. And in teaching about the two of them recently, I said, Rabbi Lamb was both a Talmud and he was also Rav Soloveitchik's boss. How did that relationship work? How did that happen?
Well, they had a wonderful relationship from the time that Rabbi Lamb came to Yeshiva University and was in the Rav Shir. He was the only one to have received both smicha and PhD from Rabbi Soloveitchik. The Rav supervised his dissertation on Rav Chaim Volozhiner and on Torah Lishma, Torah for its own sake. So they had a wonderful relationship. Rabbi Lamb consulted with him on many important issues when he was a rabbi. Wonderful stories about the Manhattan Eruv when Rabbi Lamb first came to the Jewish Center and other issues.
I'm going to stop you. Can you give me one of those wonderful stories of the Manhattan Eruv?
Oh, sure. So Rabbi Lamb came to Manhattan. The Eruv had been established years before by Rabbi Menachem Kasher. It was always the subject of great controversy. So when a new rabbi comes to Manhattan, he has to make a decision as to whether or not to accept the Eruv. So Rabbi Lamb had done his research on this, then went to see the Rav. And the Rav said to him at that time, he said, I'm not I don't know Eruvin. For the Rav not to know Eruvin, halavai, I should not know Eruvin or anything that like the Rav didn't know Eruvin. But he hadn't taken a position on it. He says, but I gave you smicha, and for a reason, if you feel comfortable accepting the legitimacy of the Manhattan Eruv, then you make that decision. That's why I gave you smicha. There were then issues with Moshe Feinstein and others. The Igod HaRabbanim wanted to come out against it. They were all okay. So he had met with Rav Moshe, with Rav Aaron Kotler. Rav Aaron Kotler had said to him, I don't know Eruvin. I don't know, somehow or other, to Gedolim. And Rabbi Lamb was supposed to go see him after Sukkot. Unfortunately, Rav Aaron died in the interim, and that conversation didn't take place. A number of years later, the Rav came out against the Manhattan Eruv. So Rabbi Lamb was concerned. He said that now that the Rav is against this, it's my Rebbe, what should I do? So he went to see the Rav. He went to see the Rav again. He said he met him at the Greasy Spoon. There was this little diner, call it a diner, across the street from the main building. Spoke with the Rav, and the Rav said, it's true, I've come out against it. He says, but I gave you smicha, and I gave you smicha for a reason. And if you feel that your psak is correct and it's right for your community, then I support you in maintaining that position. So that's a wonderful story in many ways, and speaks loads about the Rav, about Rabbi Lamb, about the way what the Rav felt about community rabbis and the importance of their authority and responsibility for their communities.
Now, it was in Rabbi Lamb's time that REITs was separated out from Yeshiva University. And the fund.
No, that was before. That was under Dr. Belkin. Dr. Belkin, yes, wanted to accept, was expanding. Dr. Belkin was an empire builder. And when he was expanding the university, and it was a question of accepting government funds, the way I remember Rabbi Lamb telling the story, that REITs became an affiliate of yeshiva, but not an official school in the yeshiva, and that then separated church and state and enabled them to get their funds. But you mentioned about the relationship between the Rav and Rabbi Lamb. When Rabbi Lamb became president, he didn't accept the position, of course, without speaking to the Rav first before anything that was taking place. But the Rav, and he met with the Rav fairly often. The Rav wanted to come to his office, to Rabbi Lamb's office. And Rabbi Lamb insisted, no, he should go to the Rav and speak to him as his Rebbe. So apparently the compromise was they switched off every other time. Sometimes the Rav came to him, and then the other times Rabbi Lamb went to see him in his apartment.
Amazing. And when you look at that relationship between a Rebbe and a Talmud, and then a Talmud who rises to greatness in his own right, what does it say to us nowadays?
I think it says a lot about the two of them and the mutual respect that they had for each other, and that Rabbi Lamb would defer to the Rav in certain ways. He also understood that it was his responsibility to lead the yeshiva. So the Rav helped him when Rabbi Lamb first came to the yeshiva, the tremendous financial crisis, and Rabbi Soloveitchik was a big help to him in taking reins of the financial problems and of raising money from some of the Balabatim. He was a secret weapon for him in many ways with regard to that. And the Rav respected Rabbi Lamb and deferred to him when it came to issues of running the yeshiva, even when they disagreed. And when Rabbi Lamb would give his annual shir on the yard site of Rabbi Yitzchak Hanan in memory of Dr. Belkin, I remember the whole spiel that he would give at the time. The Rav came and sat there and listened and showed kavod for Rabbi Lamb, not only for his leadership, but also for his lumdus, for his learning as well.
Now, if you look into the crystal ball of the RCA, what do you think we would see in a decade from now in terms of the Orthodox community in America? Are we we know we'll be larger, but what else?
Right. I can barely predict the past, let alone predict the future. The Orthodox community is growing. I think that and the more right-wing part of the Orthodox community is growing, largely because of the larger birth rate that is there and the ability to thrive in American soil. In ways that we've really never experienced before in Jewish history for a diaspora community, but we have made good headway in creating relationships with those to our right, not all of them to our right, but with those to our right in ways that haven't happened before. And I have a good relationship with a number of important leaders in what people would call the ultra-Orthodox community. And there is mutual respect. We understand each other's strengths. We understand each other's challenges. And there's a greater appreciation, I think, that within the modern Orthodox world, that there is a real commitment to Torah and a commitment to halacha in ways that may not have been appreciated in the past.
Yeah, I'm sure you still get phone calls. I get them all the time from people investigating shidduchim. And one of my least favorite questions is, how modern is he? And so when they asked me that question, typically I answer them, I said, I believe he knows how to use a computer. He can drive a car.
Right.
I think he has an iPhone. Are there any other questions of modernity you would like to know? At which
Right.
person I think turns a little red on the other side of the phone. So the modern Orthodox today is not the modern Orthodox of 20, 30 years ago, where there were practices which were some elements of compromise, or the Balabatim at least practiced in certain ways. And do you imagine that the modern Orthodox of the future will continue to slide to the right, even though maintaining the core values? Or do you think we're finding equilibrium?
I think we're being pulled, our community is being pulled to the right and to the left, and that the number of the social issues of the day are challenging, and that our young people are engaged in with those issues and are making decisions about those issues that, on all parts of the spectrum. So I don't know what the community is going to look like. I don't know. Look, I don't think we could have predicted 10, 20 years ago the important role that women are playing today in leadership, in halachic leadership. I'm not talking about women as rabbis that have not been accepted in the mainstream modern Orthodox world, but the position of Yoatzot Halacha, women as teachers, as writers, as making contributions in ways that, and having positions that didn't exist. I don't know. So I don't know what the rabbinate is going to look like 10, 20, 50 years from now, and what roles people will play and what needs people will have for their rabbis or other religious leaders. The rabbinate today is not the rabbinate of 50 years ago. And for sure, it won't be the rabbinate of 50 years from now, but what that is, I don't know.
And in terms of the preparation of rabbis, there's been a shift at yeshiva and at other places of providing more pastoral skills to rabbis, counseling skills to rabbis, and things of that nature, where once upon a time, just learn an extra blat Gemara and you'll be fine.
Right.
Is that, I view it as positive, but do you think that'll continue to expand?
I think it will continue to expand, and I think the demands of rabbinic education, both in terms of learning and in terms of professional skills and pastoral skills, is increasing, and we're making those demands of our young men. I remember the first time I had a real pastoral crisis, and was sitting with a couple, and Dr. Miller, Izzy Miller, Zichrono Livracha, was then vice president of Yeshiva, gave the one session we had on pastoral counseling in those days, and he said it's important to listen. I appreciated that. So after listening to this couple make their case, it was in my mind, I was thinking, he told us to listen, but never told us what to do after we stopped listening. So I was very fortunate to have had good mentors and mental health professionals that were part of the family and that were friends that I could consult. And my instincts were good. So I was able to be helpful in that situation and many other situations in the future. But I think the young musmachim that are coming out today are very fortunate to have much better background, much better training than we had in our day.
And the post-denominational issues, is that going to have a major impact in the Orthodox world, or is it more in the other streams of Judaism in your thoughts?
I think it's more in the other streams of Judaism to a large degree, and they're really in crisis. Numbers of clergy are down, rabbis are down, numbers in terms of participation and attendance is down. But I think we're going to see it in the Orthodox. I think we see it in the Orthodox world as well. There's barely an Orthodox synagogue that doesn't have 2, 3, 4 minyanim going on. There's more of a sense today that people want to do their own thing rather than be part of a larger community. So when I was growing up, I had friends in shul that were 80 years old and 50 years old, and it was a multi-generational experience. And I think I really gained as a result of that. We rarely see that today.
It's all the small little minyanim, the boutique experiences, as opposed to the mega shul.
Right. Look, and I understand that we can't satisfy everybody in these large, in large minyanim, and at the same time, and so therefore they need to be served, and their needs need to be met. Otherwise, they'll go elsewhere. But at the same time, I think we lose as a community. Corona certainly played a part in that. but I think we were headed there even before COVID hit, and we'll keep on going in those directions.
And with your leadership, we're going to continue finding new ways to reach out. You may Yun for rabbis and conferences for rabbis and continued information for rabbis. And Rabbi Dratch, believe it or not, our time is also up.
Okay.
So I want to thank you very much for your insights, for your stories, and for your continued leadership of our community, and wish you to have a wonderful, wonderful day. Thank you.
Appreciate that, and good luck to you and the wonderful work you do in the synagogue, in the school, and in serving modern Orthodoxy and Mizrahi and so many of the things that you do.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Thank you.